Jewish Meditation by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, a practical guide.
Chapter 14 The Ladder. One of the most vivid scenes in the Torah is that of Jacob's dream, in which he saw a ladder standing on earth with its top reaching heaven. Genesis 28:12. There is a midrash that teaches that this ladder had 4 steps. According to the great Jewish mystics, they represent the 4 steps one must climb to reach the highest level of the spiritual domain. It is taught that these 4 steps represent the 4 levels of meditational involvement: action, speech, thought, and the level above thought. As we have discussed, the level above thought is experienced as nothingness. These 4 levels also parallel the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton, YHVH, Yud-He-Vav-He, see Chapter 7. The first level is that of action, where we are still involved with our body. This parallels the final He of the Tetragrammaton, which is the hand that receives. It is through the body that we receive all blessing from God. The hand that God gives us to receive His energy is the body, which He created in the divine image. So the first and lowest level is involvement with the body and action. The second level is that of speech. On the level of speech, we can be aware that we are communicating with the divine. Speech is the angelic power in man, through which we can transcend our animal nature. Moreover, speech bridges the gap between the physical and the spiritual, and between man and God. Therefore, the level of speech parallels the Vav of the Tetragrammaton, which is the arm with which God reaches out to us. Vav has the connotation of connection, and this parallels speech, which connects God and man. The third level is that of thought. It is through the power of thought that we grasp what we can of the divine. Thought, therefore, parallels the first He of the divine name, which is God's hand that holds. Thought is the hand that holds every experience of the divine that we can experience. Finally, there is the level above thought, which is experienced as nothingness. This is the ineffable experience of the divine itself. This is the experience that we have only when all thought is turned off and we enter into the realm of pure experience, which is beyond thought. The Kabbalists teach that the morning Shacharith service is divided according to these 4 steps. The 4 divisions of the morning service are: 1. The introductory readings; 2. The verses of praise; 3. The Shema and its blessings; 4. The Amidah. We have discussed the Shema and the Amidah in earlier chapters. Let us now see how they fit into the context of the rest of the service. The introductory readings begin with blessings in which we thank God for our physical nature. They include thanksgiving blessings for our body functions, for our ability to stand, walk, and function in the physical world. As discussed earlier, the word blessed, when applied to God, denotes His immanence in the world. When we recite the blessings for bodily functions, we are sensitizing ourselves to the divine that is immanent in our own bodies. Thus, although on this level we may not yet be in touch with our spiritual nature, we become aware of our body as a receptacle for the spiritual. This is the level of the hand that receives, discussed earlier. The second half of the introductory section consists of readings dealing with the sacrificial system. These sacrifices consisted of both plants and animals. To understand the significance of these readings in the service, one must understand the place that sacrifice had in ancient Israel. The Hebrew word for sacrifice is korban, which literally means that which is brought close. The animal sacrifices were thus seen as a means of drawing close to God. The Talmud teaches that man is half animal and half angel. The body is the seat of man's animal nature, while the soul is the seat of his angelic nature. Since the body is the vessel of the soul, man's animal nature is the receptacle for his angelic nature. There are times when man must elevate his animal nature and use it as a means of serving God. The Torah thus says, "You shall love God your Lord with all your heart and with all your soul," Deuteronomy 6:5. The Talmud interprets your heart to denote man's animal nature and your soul to denote his angelic nature. The verse therefore teaches that both must be devoted to the love of God. When sacrifice was offered to ancient times, it was burned on the great altar in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The sacrifice symbolized that the animal in man also has a place in serving God. Since it is the body that is the receptacle of the divine, the body and animal nature must also be brought close to God. Therefore, the sacrificial readings in the introductory reading serve to make us aware that our bodies are vessels for the divine. At this point in the service, we are still concerned with action and the physical body, but we are beginning to connect it with the spiritual. The second part of the service is known as the verses of praise, and it consists of psalms and other biblical praises of God. This part of the service parallels the level of speech. In reciting these biblical verses, we are using speech to connect ourselves to God. In this part of the service, we should also make ourselves keenly aware of the process through which we speak and pronounce the words. We should concentrate on our tongues and lips and feel how they articulate each sound. This in itself can be a contemplation. We should also carefully listen to each sound and each word as we speak these praises of God. This section is known in Hebrew as Psukei de Zimra, literally verses of Zimra. The Hebrew word Zimra has a double meaning. It can mean praise, but it also has the connotation of cutting. The Kabbalists therefore note that the verses of Zimra serve to help us cut ourselves away from the physical. If man is half animal and half angel, then speech is uniquely associated with the angelic side of man. Indeed, where the Torah says, God formed man from the dust of the earth and blew in his nostrils a breath of life so that man became a living soul, Genesis 2:7, the Targum, the authorized Aramaic translation, translates living soul as speaking soul. Man's ability to speak is closely associated with his spiritual nature. Therefore, during this second part of the service, we become aware of our own spirituality and the connection that we have with God. The praise we chant brings us into the space of this connection, where we can transcend our physical nature. All that exists for us is our speaking to God. The Jewish mystics therefore say that one is in the world of speech, since in this state, speech is one's entire world. Thus, there is an important transition in the first two sections of the service. In the introductory readings, we are hovering over the physical world, but still attached to it. In the verses of praise, we begin to transcend it. The verses of praise conclude with the Song of the Red Sea, Exodus 15. After the exodus from Egypt, the Israelites were pursued by the Egyptians. God rescued them by splitting the Red Sea and allowing them to cross. The Egyptians who chased them into the sea were drowned when the sea returned to normal. It was only after the crossing of the Red Sea that the Israelites gained total freedom. The Kabbalists teach that the Egyptian exile represents states of immature or constricted consciousness, mochen de katnoth. At the end of the verses of praise, we emerge from constricted consciousness to a state of expanded consciousness, mochen de gadluth. This transition is made when we repeat the Song of the Red Sea. After having completed the verses of praise, we are then ready to begin the third part of the service, which consists of the Shema and its blessings. This section of the service is said to correspond to the world of thought. The spiritual ascent that we make here is in pure thought. In the verses of praise, thought was secondary to speech. In the Shema and its blessings, speech is secondary to thought. Here we are in a state of expanded consciousness, where thought is our entire world. The culmination of this section is the Shema itself, where all thought is filled with God's unity. These first three sections of the service are also said to parallel the three lowest levels of the soul. In Hebrew, the lowest level of the soul is known as nefesh, the next is called ruach, and the highest is neshama. The word nefesh comes from a root denoting rest, and ruach means wind, while neshama is also associated with breath. The Kabbalists explain the significance of these three levels using a glass blower as an analogy. In this case, the glass blower is the divine, while the vessel is the person. The glass blowing process begins with the blower's breath, neshima, blowing into the tube that connects his mouth to the vessel he is blowing. This breath then travels through the glass blowing tube as a wind, ruach, until it reaches the vessel. Finally, the breath enters the vessel and forms it according to the blower's plan, and there it comes to rest, nafash. In the case of the soul, the blower is the divine. In describing the creation of man, the Torah thus says, God formed man out of the dust of the earth, and he blew in his nostrils a soul, neshama, of life. Genesis 2:7. The highest level of the soul is thus the neshama, which is, as it were, the breath of God. This is the vessel that holds the spiritual nature that God wishes to give us. Hence, it can be said to parallel the hand that gives, the first hay of the Tetragrammaton. The second level is ruach, which is the wind blowing down to us from God's breath. This wind is seen as the connection between God's mouth, as it were, and the person. Therefore, it parallels the vav of the Tetragrammaton and the angelic world, which also denote transition. It is significant that ruach is always associated with the spiritual experience, and the expression Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, is virtually synonymous with prophecy. Finally, there is the level of nefesh, the lowest level of the soul, where it interfaces with the physical. This is the level where we are able to accept the spirituality that God desires to give us. Hence, it parallels the hand that receives, the final hay of the Tetragrammaton. Since this part of the soul is essentially passive rather than active, it is called nefesh, which literally means the resting soul. When the Torah speaks of punishment for certain serious sins, it says, that soul, nefesh, shall be cut off. It speaks of the level of nefesh, the level of the soul through which one is able to receive spiritual sustenance from God. When this is cut off from ruach, a person is cut off from his spiritual source. These three levels of the soul represent three levels of inner space. One travels through these three levels in the first three parts of the morning service. In the introductory readings, we gain an awareness of nefesh, the part of the soul that interfaces with the body. This is the level of action where the person gains an awareness of the body as a receptacle for the spiritual. On this level, one cannot feel the spiritual, but knows that the body is intimately attached to it. In the verses of praise, a person becomes aware of the level of ruach, the divine wind spirit. This is the inner space where one is totally aware of one's own spiritual nature and connection to God. This is also the level of speech. Just as speech traverses distance, so does wind. When you say the words of this section, try to feel the divine wind blowing through your being. It is no accident that the word ruach means both wind and spirit. We live in a sea of air that is so familiar to us that we remain totally oblivious to it. Similarly, we are oblivious to the sea of spirituality that surrounds us at all times. Nevertheless, when the air displays energy and moves, we feel it as a wind, ruach. When the spiritual displays energy and moves, we have an experience of spirit, ruach. The second section of the service is meant to elicit this experience. In the third part of the service, which consists of the Shema and its blessings, we reach up to the world of love and the realm of unity. Here one is aware of neshama, the breath of God. There is a vast difference between the inner space feeling of ruach and that of neshama. It is the difference between feeling a wind and a breath. A wind has energy and force, but it is impersonal. A breath is both personal and intimate. Feeling the breath of one's beloved is a most sensual experience. Therefore, in the third section of the service, a person has an neshama experience in which he feels an intimacy with God, as if God were breathing on him, as it were. This is the level of divine love and unity. After the Shema, one again recounts the story of the Exodus and repeats certain key phrases from the song at the sea. This is also a transition, but to a new, even more expanded level of consciousness that will lead to the Amidah. The third part of the service concludes with the blessing, "Blessed are you, Adonai, Redeemer of Israel." The Israel in the worshipper is here redeemed and allowed to enter the inner reaches of the divine realm. This is attained in the fourth part of the service, the Amidah. Here, one enters into a realm that transcends thought. In the Amidah, we do not think about the words we are saying, but experience them. This does not mean we are not aware of the words. Quite to the contrary, we are extremely aware, but on a level that goes beyond thought and penetrates every fiber of our being. It is as if the words are filling our entire consciousness, and their innermost meaning is becoming one with the deepest reaches of our souls. This level parallels the Yud of the Tetragrammaton. This is not the level of the hand or mind that holds the divine essence, but the essence itself. Therefore, on this level, one is intimately aware of the essence in each word. This level corresponds to a still higher level of the soul, even above neshama. This fourth level of the soul is known as chaya, which literally means life force. If the level of neshama involves an awareness of the breath of the divine, then the level of chaya is the awareness of the divine life force itself. The Zohar states that a kiss is the merging of one breath with another. Love begins with physical attraction. Then, as lovers begin communication, they begin to speak. As they get closer, they stop speaking and are merely aware of each other's breath. Finally, they come still closer, and their communication becomes a kiss, at which point they are actually in physical contact. At this moment, in the kiss, they are aware of each other's life force. Kissing is thus a natural consequence of increased intimacy in speech. The two mouths come closer and progress from speech to breath to the kiss. Thus, there are four levels in the intimacy of love: physical attraction, speech, breath, and the kiss. These same levels exist in the relationship of a person with the divine. The service is designed to bring a person through these four levels. In the introductory readings, one is attracted to God with one's physical being. In the verses of praise, one communicates with the divine in speech. In the Shema and its blessings, one experiences intimacy with the divine on the level of breath. Finally, the Amidah is the kiss, and the level of communication is with the life force itself. It is significant that the level of communication of the Amidah is life force, since the Hebrew word for life is chai, ches yud, which has a numerical value of 18, 8 plus 10. 18 is also the basic number of blessings in the Amidah. After the Amidah, there is a fifth section of the service, which is known as the descent of influx, Yeridat HaShefa. Here one strives to bring the spiritual levels that one has attained during the service into one's life. It is not enough to have the experience, one must also be able to hold on to it and keep it for the entire day. We thus see that the daily service is much more than a mere order of prayer. It is, in fact, a spiritual pilgrimage in which one rises from one level of spirituality to the next, gaining ever increasing intimacy with the divine. It is a daily meditation experience that can have the most profound spiritual effects on a person.